The bus dropped me 3 blocks from Mercer Industrial Park at exactly 6:15 on a Tuesday morning, and the cold hit me hard enough to wake up muscles I forgot I still had. Eastern Europe in January was brutal, but Missouri in early November had its own kind of mean. The wind carried that damp factory smell mixed with diesel fuel and old rainwater sitting in cracked pavement. I stood there with one canvas duffel bag digging into my shoulder and stared at the empty streets like I'd landed in the wrong city. Nobody tells you how weird silence feels after deployment. For 11 months, I slept through generators humming outside temporary barracks, forklifts screaming across supply zones, radios crackling at 3 in the morning because somebody lost a fuel manifest. Then suddenly, you come home, and all you hear is a loose street sign tapping against a pole while some guy in a donut truck half a mile away slams his cargo door shut. It makes your brain itch. I pulled my faded gray jacket tighter and started walking toward my grandfather's warehouse at the end of Halpern Street. The old brick building wasn't much to look at. About 4,000 square feet, flat roof, rust stains under the gutters, one tiny office with fake wood paneling from probably 1978. But it was mine. My grandfather left it to me when I was 26 because, according to him, I was the only Vance who knew how to finish something. That sentence caused about 6 straight years of family tension around Thanksgiving dinners. Worth it. I used deployment bonuses and hazard pay to keep the place alive little by little. New electrical panels 2 summers ago. Roof repairs in March. Property taxes automatically drafted every January at 8:03 a.m. because I don't trust myself to remember deadlines after 12-hour Army shifts. The warehouse wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some billionaire fantasy investment. It was proof I existed outside the Army. As I got closer, something immediately felt wrong. The old chain-link fence was gone. My grandfather's rusted padlock wasn't hanging from the front gate anymore either. I slowed down near the sidewalk curb and looked at fresh tire tracks cutting through gravel that used to sit untouched for months at a time. Somebody had cleared the weeds around the loading dock too. Then I saw the banner, bright red, huge white letters, Solgen under construction, West Haven Commercial Development Group, bolted directly into my building like they were hanging a Christmas decoration. I stopped walking. A city bus rolled past behind me, spraying dirty water across the curb, and some construction guy inside a yellow vest glanced at me through the window before looking away again. I probably looked homeless, standing there with military luggage and combat boots. Nobody bothered to clean properly before discharge leave. For about 10 seconds, I honestly thought I had the wrong address. Jet lags does strange things to your brain. So does 11 months of military cargo schedules and 4-hour sleep cycles. I checked the warehouse number twice anyway. 402. Still mine, supposedly. I walked closer until my boots scraped loose concrete near the entrance. There was a brand new steel lock on the front doors now. Heavy-duty commercial grade. Expensive. Somebody had installed temporary security cameras under the roofline too. That's when I noticed the permit papers taped inside the dusty front window. Demolition approval pending, site conversion planned, estimated completion date, March 18. I just stood there staring at the paperwork while freezing wind pushed against my jacket sleeves. No phone calls, no emails, no certified letters, nothing. My family knew I was coming home that week. My mother had texted me 3 days earlier asking if I still liked pecan pie. Julian sent me a thumbs-up emoji after I landed in Chicago during my connecting flight. Meanwhile, somebody sold my building. Honestly, that part didn't even hurt first. What hurt first was realizing nobody thought I'd notice. I leaned down and picked up one of the broken chunks of concrete near the curb. Fresh drill dust still sat around the bolts, holding the giant red sign into the brick wall. Somebody installed it recently, probably within the last 48 hours if the weather stains hadn't settled yet. Military logistics teaches you to notice stupid little details because stupid little details get people killed. The screws were stainless steel hex heads. Contractor grade. Rushed installation, cheap labor. West Haven probably planned to gut the place fast before winter fully hit. I almost laughed. My grandfather spent 32 years running inventory out of that warehouse wearing the same brown work jacket every day. The man hid cash inside coffee cans because he thought banks were organized gambling. He'd lose his mind if he saw developers slapping luxury apartment renderings onto his loading dock. Probably haunt somebody. A white pickup truck turned onto Halpern Street and slowed near the curb beside me. The driver rolled his window down halfway. You with Westhaven? He asked. No, you can't stand inside the perimeter. Mom, liability issue. I looked around. There wasn't even caution tape yet, just arrogance. Got it, I said quietly. The guy nodded once like he'd already forgotten my face and drove off toward the back alley entrance. And that was the moment it finally landed. I was trespassing on my own property. I slipped my hands into my jacket pockets because they suddenly felt unsteady, then looked up at that massive red banner hanging over my grandfather's warehouse while freezing wind rattled the loose metal drain pipe above me. 11 months overseas, 3 combat supply zones, hundreds of classified transport manifests. And somehow the dumbest thing waiting for me back home was my own family. Have you ever come home believing you still had a place in someone's life, only to realize they already decided what you were worth while you were gone? Comment below. And if you like stories about quiet revenge, family betrayal, and people getting exactly what they earned, subscribe to the channel. I kept my hands in my jacket pockets until I reached the corner diner across from Mercer Freight Rail Yard because I didn't trust myself not to put my fist through somebody's windshield. The place was called Dottie's Grill, which sounded less like a restaurant and more like a woman who chains-smoked Virginia Slims behind a bowling alley in 1989. The neon open sign flickered hard enough to trigger a migraine, and the windows still had paper snowflakes taped to them from last winter. Perfect. Nobody asks questions inside places like that. A tired waitress with silver roots in her dyed black hair pointed me toward a booth near the back without even looking up from her coffee pot. I slid into the corner seat, dropped my duffel bags beside me, and finally let myself breathe for the first time since seeing that giant red banner bolted onto my building. The vinyl seat was cracked open near the edge. Cold air leaked through the front windows every time somebody walked in. A guy in coveralls was eating scrambled eggs while reading bankruptcy notices in the local paper. Honestly, the atmosphere fit my morning. Coffee? The waitress asked. Yes, please. You want food? Not unless you serve emotional stability before 7 in the morning. That finally got half a smile out of her. Honey, if I had that, I wouldn't still be working Tuesdays. Fair point. She poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug that probably survived 3 divorces and at least 1 kitchen fire. I wrapped both hands around it while pulling my laptop from the duffel bag. Military-issued encryption sleeve, black exterior, no stickers, no personality, very army. Most people panic first when something goes wrong. They call relatives. They scream. They demand explanations from people already planning their lies. Logistics officers don't get that luxury. When fuel shipments disappear overseas, nobody cares about your feelings. You track paperwork, timestamps, signatures, transfer routes, authorization chains. Somebody always leaves a trail because human beings are lazy when they think nobody smart is watching. And Julian had never once mistaken me for smart. I connected to the diner's terrible Wi-Fi at exactly 6:42 a.m. and opened the county clerk's public property records database. The website looked like it was designed during the Bush administration by somebody who hated colors. Lot 402, Mercer Industrial District, current status, transfer completed. I felt my jaw tighten. The transfer date was October 14th, 3 weeks earlier. Cash sale finalized through Blackridge Commercial Escrow Services downtown. Sale amount, $315,000. That number irritated me almost more than the theft itself. Julian sold the building cheap. The warehouse alone was worth closer to $400,000 with industrial zoning rights intact. More if somebody knew how freight access expansions were affecting the district after the rail redevelopment proposal passed last spring. But Julian always wanted fast money. Long-term planning gave him hives. I clicked deeper into the file records and found the transfer authorization packet attached as a scanned PDF. 8 pages, clean formatting, professional filing work. Then I saw my own signature, almost. At first glance, it looked convincing enough. Same slant, same spacing, same sharp pressure marks on the capitals C and Clara, but they pushed too hard copying the loops. That happens when somebody traces confidence instead of naturally writing it. I zoomed in further. Power of attorney authorization, temporary asset control granted to Julian Vance during overseas military deployment. Signed and notarized. My mother's notary stamp sat neatly at the bottom right corner. Eleanor Vance, commission valid through 2028. I stared at that stamp for a long time, not because I was shocked, because suddenly, about 15 different family conversations from the past 2 years rearranged themselves inside my head like puzzle pieces finally snapping together. My mother's constantly asking whether I still needed that ugly warehouse. Julian joking during Christmas dinner that I should sell it before. The homeless turned it into a vape lounge. My mother casually asking where I kept my important paperwork while pretending to help clean after dinner. None of this started 3 weeks ago. These people planned this. The waitress returned with a refill and glanced at my screen. "You buying property?" she asked. "Apparently I'm buying trust issues." She snorted loud enough that the guy reading bankruptcy notices looked over at us. "Bad divorce, worse family." "Oh, hell," she muttered. "Yeah, that'll do it." I leaned back against the booth and reopened the escrow breakdown documents. Julian received $298,417.80 after fees and taxes. The remaining funds were wired directly into 4 separate creditor settlements within 48 hours, credit card lawsuits, business debt restructuring, 2 delinquent luxury vehicle leases, and 1 terrifyingly large private gambling marker filed through Casino Holding Company in Kansas City. I closed my eyes for a second. Julian didn't steal my warehouse because he was desperate to survive. He stole it because he refused to look unsuccessful. That was always his real addiction, not money, appearance. My older brother leased cars he couldn't afford just to park them outside restaurants where nobody knew him. He wore tailored suits while hiding overdue notices in kitchen drawers. The man once spent $200 on a watch during the same month our mother borrowed grocery money from me. Because according to my family, I was the stable one. Translation: useful. Outside the diner windows, the sky slowly turned from black to that ugly gray color Midwestern mornings get before snow. Freight trains rattled somewhere in the distance while kitchen staff argued near the grill about football bets. Normal life kept moving. Meanwhile, my own mother notarized documents helping my brother sell property that legally belonged to her deployed daughter. The betrayal itself was awful. The professionalism almost impressed me. Triplicate filings, verified escrow, tax declarations, digital timestamps. They didn't treat this like a mistake. They treated it like business. And sitting there inside that freezing diner booth with stale coffee and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, I realized something that honestly hurt worse than losing the warehouse. Nobody in my family thought I'd understand what they did. Not legally, not financially, not strategically. To them, I was still the quiet girl who folded napkins after dinner while Julian explained the stock market loud enough for everybody to hear. I looked back down at the forged signature on the screen and took another slow sip of coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes earlier. Then I opened an entirely different folder on my laptop. Vanguard Holdings LLC. I closed the Vanguard Holdings folder without opening a single document and spent the next 4 days pretending nothing was wrong. Honestly, that part came easier than I expected. The Army teaches you how to keep your face neutral while absolute stupidity unfolds in front of you. Once you've watched a lieutenant destroy a $6 million supply route because he ignored weather reports from 3 different countries, smiling politely through family dinner becomes surprisingly manageable. By Sunday evening, I was sitting at my mother's dining table in Westbrook Hills wearing a dark sweater and jeans while Eleanor Vance performed Wealth like it was community theater. Everything in that house looked aggressively expensive. White marble countertops nobody cooked on. Decorative bowls that held nothing. Candles arranged in groups of 3, because apparently rich suburban women believe odd numbers cure sadness. My mother floated around the dining room carrying a bottle of imported wine she absolutely could not afford without Julian helping cover bills. She kept mentioning the vineyard was small and exclusive, which usually means somebody online charged triple for mediocre grapes. Julian sat at the head of the table wearing a navy cashmere quarter zip and a watch large enough to communicate with satellites. The watch was new. So was the Porsche parked outside. Interesting timing. "You're awfully quiet tonight," my mother said while spooning roasted carrots onto my plate. "I spent almost a year living beside shipping containers and armed checkpoints," I replied. "This is actually the most peaceful meal I've had in months." Julian laughed too hard at that. My brother always did that, when he thought he was winning something invisible. "Well," he said, cutting into his roast beef, "civilian life probably feels slow after all your military spy stuff." I looked at him. Logistics. Right, whatever version of spreadsheets carries guns. There it was. That tiny little edge Julian always added whenever he talked about my career. Like military service was adorable but intellectually beneath him. because he once listened to half a podcast about cryptocurrency. I took a sip of water instead of responding. My mother leaned against the table, smiling carefully in Julian's direction, the same way people admire toddlers for drawing crooked stick figures. Your brother's been very busy while you were away, she said proudly. I heard. Julian shrugged with fake humility. Couple commercial acquisitions. Some redevelopment partnerships. Nothing huge. The man said this while wearing enough leased clothing to finance a small dental practice. I picked lightly at the roast beef on my plate, while Eleanor refilled wine glasses nobody finished. The dining room chandelier reflected off crystal glasses and polished silverware so brightly it almost hurt my eyes. When I was 14, this same family ate spaghetti on folding chairs because our electricity got shut off for 2 days. Funny how fast people rewrite history once credit scores recover. You know, my mother continued casually, you really shouldn't stress about that old warehouse anymore. There it was. Smooth delivery. Too smooth. I kept my expression flat. What warehouse? The industrial one your grandfather left you. Julian immediately looked down at his plate to hide a smile. Amateurs always look away after lying. It was becoming a liability, my mother said. That neighborhood's changing. Crime, transients, all those ugly freight lots. Mom, Julian interrupted softly, pretending to defend me. It's still her property. Not anymore, apparently. Eleanor waved him off dramatically. You know what I mean. Clara was overseas. Somebody needed to keep an eye on things. I stabbed another carrot mostly to keep my hands occupied. And luckily, she continued, raising her wine glass slightly toward Julian, your brother understands business. There it was again, not just theft, performance. They needed recognition for stealing from me. Julian finally leaned back in his chair, wearing the expression of a man deeply impressed with himself for successfully refinancing debt using fraud. Well, industrial real estate's complicated, he said. Timing matters. Market positioning. You can't just sit on dead assets forever. Dead assets. My grandfather spent 3 decades inside that warehouse. The man taught me multiplication by making me count inventory pallets after school. He hid peppermint candies in the office desk and called every forklift she for reasons nobody understood. After Grandma died, he practically lived in that building because work gave him structure. And now Julian talked about it like expired yogurt. I'm sure Clara appreciates the help, my mother added quickly. I finally looked directly at her. That almost made her uncomfortable. Almost. You really think that? I asked calmly. Eleanor blinked once before recovering. Of course I do. You've always been practical, Julian added. That's one thing I respect about you. I nearly laughed out loud. My brother respected practicality so much he once financed patio furniture during a recession. Outside, headlights swept across the dining room windows as a neighbor pulled into their driveway. Somewhere deeper inside the house, the dishwasher hummed quietly under polished granite counters. My mother definitely described as European-inspired to guests. Everything looked warm, safe, normal. That was the disturbing part. Nobody at this table felt guilty. Julian genuinely believed he outsmarted me. My mother genuinely believed protecting him justified anything she signed. They sat there eating roast beef and drinking imported wine while discussing my stolen property like responsible adults managing a complicated family asset. Their cruelty came wrapped in manners. You know what the funniest part is? Julian said suddenly. I looked at him. She probably would sold it eventually anyway. My mother laughed softly into her wine glass. Not nervous laughter, agreement. Something cold settled into my chest then, but it wasn't anger anymore. Anger burns hot and messy. This felt cleaner than that. Sharper. Like finally seeing the full shape of something ugly you spent years trying to explain away. I looked around the dining room one more time. The expensive chandelier, the staged family photographs, the polished hardwood floors partially paid for with my deployment checks after Dad died. And sitting right in the center of it all were 2 people completely convinced they had successfully robbed the quietest person in the family without consequences. I cut one last piece of roast beef and chewed slowly while Julian kept talking about commercial zoning trends he clearly learned from YouTube. Then I smiled for the first time all evening, because neither of them had any idea what Vanguard Holdings LLC actually owned. I kept smiling all the way through dessert. That was probably the part that would have disturbed Julian the most if he understood me at all. My mother served cheesecake on expensive white plates with tiny gold trim around the edges, while Julian kept talking about future expansion opportunities. like a guy auditioning to become LinkedIn in human form. Every few minutes, he'd glance at me carefully, waiting for signs of panic or confusion. I gave him absolutely nothing. By 9:14 p.m., I hugged my mother goodbye in her marble entryway while she smelled like wine and expensive hand lotion. She squeezed my arm gently and told me she was proud I'd adjusted so well after deployment. Adjusted. Interesting word choice from a woman who helped forge legal documents. You should come by more often, she said softly. Work schedule, I replied. Well, now that you're home, maybe life can finally slow down. Behind her, Julian stood near the staircase scrolling through his phone with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed his problems were officially over. Then I noticed the Porsche key fob sitting in his hand, brand new. Still had the dealer tag attached. That explained at least $94,000 of his decision-making process. I'll call you this week, my mother said. Sure. I stepped outside into the freezing night air before either of them could say anything else. The entire neighborhood smelled faintly like fireplace smoke and wet leaves. Wealthy suburban silence. No sirens. No freight trains. No people yelling outside liquor stores at midnight. Just carefully maintained comfort. My apartment sat 23 minutes away on the east side near Riverside Freight District. Smaller building. Older plumbing. Rent stabilized because the owner lost a lawsuit in 2017, and the city forced half the units under controlled pricing agreements. Honestly, I liked it there. Nobody pretended to be impressive. By the time I climbed the stairs to my third-floor unit, my body finally felt heavy again. Deployment exhaustion mixed with emotional exhaustion strange ways. Your brain stays sharp while your bones feel 90 years old. I unlocked the apartment door at exactly 9:52 p.m. One bedroom, small kitchen, military precision cleanliness. The place smelled faintly like cedar because I kept old storage blocks inside the closets to fight moisture. A single floor lamp glowed beside the couch where I'd left folded laundry before deployment. Everything looked exactly the same as when I left 11 months earlier. Predictable spaces matter when the world gets stupid. I took off my boots, loosened my jacket, and walked straight past the kitchen toward the back wall beside my desk. The filing cabinet sat exactly where I left it. 4 drawers, dark gray steel, heavy enough to survive minor warfare. Most people store emotional baggage in therapy journals or bad relationships. I preferred organized documentation. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick black portfolio binder labeled Vanguard Holdings LLC, no gold lettering, no dramatic branding, just practical legal structure. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened the first section, while the radiator clicked softly against the wall nearby. Property acquisition records, tax certificates, commercial easement agreements, utility access maps, corporate registration filings. Over the last 8 years, I bought property the same way some people build retirement accounts. Slowly, quietly, without needing applause. My first deployment bonus purchased the abandoned laundromat beside Lot 402 back in 2018. Everybody thought I was insane at the time because the building smelled like mold and somebody had stolen half the copper piping. Cost me $38,200. Best decision I ever made. 2 years later, Vanguard Holdings acquired the empty gravel parking lot directly behind my grandfather's warehouse after the previous owner got arrested for tax fraud. Then came the narrow service alley bordering the eastern side of the property. Then another storage building across the street. One piece at a time, methodical, boring, invisible. I spread the district maps across my kitchen table under the overhead light and looked at the entire commercial block the way Julian never had. That was his biggest weakness. My brother only saw individual transactions. I saw systems. Lot 402 sat directly in the center of the district like the hole in a donut. Every delivery route feeding into the building crossed property controlled by Vanguard Holdings LLC. Water utility access lines ran beneath adjacent parcels I owned. Construction equipment staging areas required parking permissions from lots under my corporate registration. Even the rear freight entrance depended on an alley easement tied to one of my shell entities. Julian sold the building, but he never checked the perimeter. I leaned back slowly in my chair and remembered all those years my family treated me like background noise during financial conversations. Julian explaining investment strategies while carrying credit card debt. My mother nodding proudly every time he used phrases like liquid capital and portfolio leverage. Meanwhile, I quietly purchased half a city block without either of them noticing. There's a certain type of person who mistakes silence for incompetence. Those people usually learn expensive lessons. I opened another folder containing utility agreements and ran through the details again carefully. Natural gas routing access, shared drainage maintenance responsibilities, commercial loading permissions, temporary demolition staging restrictions. Every single thing West Haven Development would need to renovate that warehouse depended on surrounding land cooperation. My cooperation. Outside the apartment windows, snow started falling lightly over Riverside's district. I could hear trucks shifting gears down near the freight corridor while somebody in another apartment laughed loudly at a television show through thin walls. Normal sounds. Steady sounds. I appreciated that. No screaming, no revenge fantasies, no dramatic plotting, just paperwork. That's the funny thing about real power. Most of the time it looks incredibly boring until somebody suddenly realizes they can't move forward without your signature. I flipped to the final section of the Vanguard portfolio and studied the master ownership summary for a long moment. 9 surrounding parcels, 3 utility easements, 2 freight access corridors, 1 controlling corporate entity, all legally airtight. And sitting directly in the middle of it all was my grandfather's old brick warehouse, currently owned by a commercial developer who thought he purchased a valuable standalone property. He didn't. He bought an island. And islands only matter if somebody lets you build a bridge. I signed the final easement revocation documents at 8:11 Thursday morning while eating oatmeal that tasted like damp cardboard. Honestly, fitting breakfast for the occasion. The law office handling Vanguard Holdings sat downtown on the 17th floor of a building that smelled permanently like copier toner and expensive divorces. My attorney, Linda Caraway, wore rectangular glasses and the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years professionally disappointed in humanity, which probably made her excellent at real estate litigation. She slid the final paperwork across the conference table toward me while snow drifted lightly outside the windows. "You're absolutely certain you want permanent revocation language?" she asked. "Yes. No temporary suspension?" "No." Linda nodded once and adjusted the stack of property maps beside her. "For the record," she said carefully, "this is one of the most aggressive commercial access closures I've ever seen executed without active litigation." "I learned logistics from the federal government," I replied. "We make simple things horrifying." That earned the smallest smile I'd seen from her all week. I signed the final page. Just like that, every construction access agreement surrounding Lot 402 officially disappeared. No rear alley freight entry, no demolition equipment staging, no temporary utility trench access, no shared drainage permissions, no commercial loading clearance. Legally speaking, West Haven Development now owned a brick warehouse they couldn't touch without violating 6 different property restrictions and probably 3 city ordinances. And the best part, everything I did was completely legal. By 9:47 a.m., Linda's office electronically filed the cease and desist package directly to Marcus Thorne's development firm. At 10:26, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then again at 10:31, and again at 10:34, Julian. I muted the phone and kept organizing tax records at my kitchen table while Riverside district traffic groaned outside under fresh snow. Somewhere downstairs, my neighbor was loudly arguing with somebody named Rick about fantasy football payouts. Meanwhile, roughly 4 miles away, my brother's entire life was starting to catch fire inside a glass conference room. I know because Linda called me at 11:08, sounding deeply entertained. "You would have enjoyed this," she said. "I'm listening." Apparently, Marcus Thorne's boardroom looked exactly how rich developers imagine success should look. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported mahogany conference table, stainless steel water pitchers nobody drinks from. Julian arrived wearing another expensive quarter-zip sweater and carrying finalized demolition permits for the warehouse redevelopment project. According to Linda, he spent the first 20 minutes confidently explaining future profit projections, while Marcus Thorne reviewed construction timelines. Then West Haven's chief legal counsel walked into the room, and everything changed. She interrupted the meeting mid-sentence, Linda said. Didn't sit down. Just placed the cease and desist packet directly in front of Thorne. I leaned back in my chair quietly. "How bad?" Linda actually laughed. "Oh, Major Vance. Your brother apparently didn't disclose that the surrounding commercial parcels belonged to the same holding company." There it was. The wall. Marcus Thorne initially thought the filing was a negotiation tactic. That happens constantly in commercial redevelopment. Somebody complains about parking access or temporary road use, then everybody argues over money for 3 weeks. But then the legal counsel explained the actual situation. Vanguard Holdings LLC owned every bordering parcel surrounding Lot 402. Everyone, the western parking lot, the rear freight alley, the utility trench corridor, the adjacent loading access lane, even the temporary demolition equipment staging area. Julian sold them a warehouse sitting in the center of privately controlled access points, like a boat trapped in concrete. You're telling me, Marcus reportedly said very slowly, that we cannot physically reach the property we purchased? According to Linda, nobody answered immediately. That silence probably hurt more. I pictured Julian sitting there in his polished developer costume while real estate attorneys flipped through maps, proving his sister quietly owned half the district surrounding the building he stole. I almost felt bad for him, almost. What happened next? I asked. Thorne demanded clarification. That sounded polite compared to what probably actually happened. Marcus Thorne had a reputation downtown for being brilliant, ruthless, and deeply unpleasant during contract disputes. The kind of man who billed consultants for breathing too confidently in meetings. And Julian sold him a legally unusable property for $315,000. Oops. Linda shuffled papers audibly over the phone. The construction access issue is catastrophic by itself, she explained, but utility easement revocations make the property commercially non-functional, meaning no redevelopment permits could move forward. No demolition, no new utility installations, no large-scale renovation approval, nothing. The warehouse technically existed. Practically speaking, it was dead. Did Julian know? I asked. Linda paused. Based on witness statements, she said carefully. Your brother appeared extremely surprised. I stared out my apartment window at snow collecting along the freight tracks below. That part actually made sense. Julian never studied property law because Julian never studied anything that couldn't immediately impress strangers at restaurants. To him, ownership ended at the walls of a building, but real estate power usually lives around the building. Access, utilities, movement, control. The boring stuff nobody notices until it disappears. Linda continued talking. Thorne asked your brother 3 separate times why these surrounding ownership disclosures weren't included during negotiations. And? Apparently, Julian claimed he thought the neighboring parcels belonged to unrelated investors. I laughed quietly into my coffee mug. Because technically they did. That was the beauty of shell structures and layered corporate registrations. Vanguard Holdings LLC sat behind 2 smaller acquisition entities tied to separate management addresses. Completely legal, completely documented, completely invisible unless somebody bothered doing competent due diligence. Julian never did competent anything. By noon, West Haven Development halted all demolition scheduling indefinitely. Contractors were sent home. Permit reviews froze. Financial analysts started recalculating projected losses tied to delayed redevelopment timelines. And somewhere inside that giant glass boardroom, my brother finally realized he hadn't stolen a forgotten warehouse from his quiet military sister. He had walked blindfolded into a legal ambush built patiently over 8 years. A fortress is a funny thing. From the outside, it usually just looks like ordinary land. Right until the gates close behind you. I spent 40 minutes polishing my dress shoes Friday morning, even though nobody in that boardroom deserved the effort. But uniforms matter. Not for intimidation, for clarity. Every crease, ribbon, and insignia says the same thing without speaking. This person survives pressure for a living. By 9:18 a.m., I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror adjusting the collar on my Army Class A uniform while snow drifted slowly past the apartment windows outside. The gold oak leaves on my shoulders caught the light from the overhead fixture every time I moved. Major Clara Vance. Funny how differently people treat you once rank becomes visible. My phone buzzed again on the counter. Julian. 4th voicemail since yesterday afternoon. I ignored it. Then another message arrived immediately after. Clara, call me. There's been some confusion with a development issue. Development issue. That was one way to describe catastrophic commercial fraud. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket, grabbed the Vanguard Holdings master portfolio, and headed downtown. West Haven Commercial Development occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking the financial district. The lobby smelled like expensive cologne and fresh printer ink. Two giant abstract sculptures sat near the elevators, looking exactly like things rich people pretend to understand. A receptionist in a gray blazer glanced up when I entered. Her entire posture changed the second she saw the uniform. "Good morning, Major," she said quickly. Military people notice that kind of thing instantly. Civilians hear the title and suddenly start standing straighter like we might assign homework. "I'm here for Marcus Thorne." She typed something nervously into her computer. "They're currently in a legal meeting on 31. I know. That confused her. Good. The elevator ride felt strangely quiet, not emotionally quiet. More like the atmosphere inside a courtroom 5 minutes before sentencing. When the doors opened onto the executive floor, I immediately heard Julian's voice echoing from behind the boardroom doors. Nobody disclosed those ownership structures during preliminary review because they weren't relevant to the original transfer agreement. "They are absolutely relevant now," another man snapped. "Marcus Thorne." Even angry, his voice sounded expensive. I walked calmly toward the conference room while two junior associates standing near the hallway pretended not to stare at me. The Vanguard portfolio felt heavy under my arm, not physically, historically. 8 years of patience weighs something. At exactly 10 a.m., I opened the boardroom doors. The room went silent so fast it almost felt rehearsed. Marcus Thorne stood near the far end of the mahogany table wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first deployment vehicle. Mid-40s, sharp jawline, cold eyes, the kind of man who treated conversations like acquisitions. 3 attorneys sat along the side of the room, surrounded by properties and legal filings. And Julian. Julian looked terrible. Not dramatic movie terrible, real terrible. Dark circles under his eyes. Sweat collecting near his collar despite the air conditioning. That specific expression people get when they realize confidence and competence are not the same thing. The second he saw me, his face shifted through about 6 emotions at once. Relief, confusion, hope, then fear. "Clara," he said quickly, standing halfway from his chair. "Thank God. There's been some misunderstanding with these access claims." I didn't answer him. Instead, I walked directly to the center of the boardroom table and placed the Vanguard Holdings portfolio beside the scattered contract files already sitting there. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from heating vents humming softly overhead. Marcus Thorne studied me carefully. "Major Vance, yes." His legal counsel immediately looked uncomfortable. "Smart woman." Julian forced a nervous laugh. "See, this is what I've been trying to explain. My sister owns the original warehouse, but obviously she'll cooperate once we clear this up." "I don't own the warehouse anymore," I said calmly. That shut him up. I opened the portfolio slowly and removed the master deed packet from the top section. 27 pages. Certified filings, corporate registrations, easement control maps. Then I placed the documents directly on top of Julian's fraudulent transfer contract. Not aggressively, just precisely. Marcus Thorne picked up the first page immediately. His eyes moved across the paperwork once. Then again slower. I watched the exact moment he understood what he was looking at. Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Clara Elise Else, Vance. Complete ownership registry attached. 9 surrounding parcels. Commercial utility authority. Freight access control rights. Every bordering property. All mine. Across the table, Julian stared down at the documents like they were written in another language. "No," he said quietly. Nobody responded. "No, that's not." He swallowed hard. "Clara, what is this?" I finally looked directly at him. "The neighborhood you sold." His face lost color instantly, not metaphorically, actually. The blood drained right out of him while his brain desperately tried reorganizing reality into something survivable. "You?" he whispered. There it was. That beautiful little moment when arrogant people realized the quiet person in the room understood everything the entire time. Marcus Thorne turned another page slowly. "You own the entire surrounding block," he said flatly. "Yes, and these easement revocations are legally enforceable." "Yes." One of the attorneys cleared his throat awkwardly. "We verified the filings this morning," he admitted. Julian looked around the room like somebody searching for hidden exits. "This is insane," he snapped suddenly. "She never told anybody she owned those properties." I almost laughed. "You never asked." Marcus Thorne closed the portfolio carefully and stared at Julian with the expression of a man calculating financial homicide. "You sold me a non-functional property," he said quietly. Julian immediately panicked. "No, wait, hold on. The building itself is legitimate. The transfers was valid. We can renegotiate access rights." "With the woman you defrauded," Marcus interrupted. Silence. One of the attorneys slowly removed his glasses. Nobody wanted to be associated with Julian anymore. You could physically feel it happening in real time, like watching passengers quietly move away from somebody screaming at an airport gate. Julian looked back at me desperately. "Clara, come on," he said. "We're family." That word landed strangely after forged signatures and stolen inheritances. Family. Interesting timing again. I adjusted the cuff of my uniform calmly while Marcus Thorne reopened the fraud investigation packet sitting beside him. And for the first time since this entire mess started, my brother finally understood something devastatingly simple. He hadn't robbed his quiet military sister. He had robbed the person holding every piece of leverage in the room. The math finally broke right in front of him. The room stayed quiet for about 5 full seconds after Marcus Thorne closed the Vanguard portfolio. Not calm quiet, predator quiet. The kind where everybody suddenly understands somebody's about to lose a tremendous amount of money. Then Marcus pressed the intercom button built into the conference table. "Get corporate litigation upstairs," he said flatly. Now, Julian straightened immediately. "Marcus, hold on, and contact forensic accounting." "Marcus, I also want escrow transfer timelines, notarization verification, and fraud exposure assessments." Before noon, that landed hard. Fraud exposure. Not misunderstanding, not negotiation complications, fraud. Julian's face tightened so fast it almost looked painful. "This is getting blown completely out of proportion," he snapped. The property transfer itself was legitimate. Marcus slowly turned toward him. "No," he said calmly. "It absolutely was not." One of the attorneys opened the forged power of attorney packet again and slid it across the table. "Your sister was deployed overseas at the time of transfer," the attorney said carefully. "Which means if the authorization signature was falsified, we are now discussing interstate fraud, forged notarization records, and potentially federal criminal exposure." Federal. That word changes room temperature. Julian looked toward me again like I might somehow rescue him from consequences he personally assembled. "Clara," he said sharply, lowering his voice, "tell them this isn't criminal." I kept my hands folded calmly in front of me. "You sold property you didn't own. I had authorization. You forged authorization." His jaw flexed hard. "I didn't forge anything." Interesting choice of wording. Not "I'm innocent," just technically distancing himself from the pen. Across the room, Marcus already looked emotionally done with him. Developers like Thorne don't care about morality, they care about liability. And Julian had transformed a routine commercial redevelopment project into something involving criminal attorneys and military deployment documentation. That's corporate cyanide. The boardroom doors suddenly opened again before anybody could speak further. My mother rushed inside wearing a cream-colored wool coat and oversized sunglasses, despite the fact it was snowing outside, and nobody here was paparazzi. Eleanor Vance entered emotional situations the same way regional theater actors enter musicals. Aggressively. "Oh my God," she gasped dramatically. "Julian!" Apparently she'd been waiting in the lobby the entire time. Of course she had. Julian stood immediately. "Moms, it's fine." "No, it is not fine," she cried, clutching her handbag like somebody announcing a medical emergency aboard a cruise ship. Then she saw me standing beside the conference table. And just like that, the performance changed direction. "Clara," she breathed. There was a very specific tone mothers use when they suddenly remember which child still has practical value. She hurried toward me fast enough that one of the attorneys instinctively stepped backward. "Honey, please," she said, grabbing my uniform sleeve with both hands. "This has gone too far." I looked down at her fingers, clutching army fabric that cost me 14 years of my life to earn. Interesting contrast. 3 weeks ago, she notarized forged paperwork helping my brother steal from me. Now suddenly, we were back to honey. "You need to stop this," she whispered desperately. "Your brother made mistakes, but he was under pressure." Pressure, that magical condition apparently unavailable to deployed soldiers overseas. Marcus Thorne quietly stepped away from the table while Eleanor kept talking. "A good sister doesn't destroy her own family over business," she said. "Please, just sign the access rights. We can work this out privately." There it was. The real request. Not apology, not accountability. Convenience. My mother didn't care that they stole from me. She cared that consequences finally arrived wearing expensive shoes. Julian stayed silent behind her now. Smart move for once. He understood the emotional manipulation worked better coming from Mom. Eleanor's eyes started filling with tears. Real tears too, probably. That's the tricky part about people like my mother. The emotions are genuine. They just happen to be attached to completely selfish motivations. You can't send your brother to prison, she whispered. Please tell me you understand that. Prison. Funny how quickly she skipped past whether he actually committed crimes. I gently removed her hands from my sleeve. Not rough, not emotional, just firm. The room stayed completely silent while I adjusted the collar of my uniform carefully beneath the fluorescent lights. Then I looked directly at my mother for what felt like the first honest moment we'd shared in years. Family duty apparently didn't apply when you sold a deployed soldier's inheritance to fund a leased Porsche. She flinched immediately. Not because I raised my voice, because I didn't. Truth sounds much worse when spoken quietly. Clara, she whispered. No, Julian finally snapped. Oh, come on, he barked. You're seriously going to act morally superior right now? You own half the damn district under fake companies like some cartoon billionaire. One of the attorneys actually coughed to hide a laugh. I looked at my brother calmly. I bought property legally. You buried ownership structures intentionally. That's called commercial privacy. You trapped me. No, I said evenly. You trapped yourself. You just didn't realize the walls were already there. Marcus Thorne slowly sat back down beside the conference table, looking almost fascinated now. Probably because this no longer felt like business litigation. It felt personal. And personal disasters are incredibly entertaining when they're happening to somebody else. My mother's voice cracked suddenly. We are still your family. That one almost got me, not emotionally, historically, because for years I wanted that sentence to mean something real. I spent entire deployments wiring money home when Mom struggled financially. I paid Julian's overdue insurance bill once after he lied about having pneumonia. I kept trying to earn softness from people who only valued usefulness. Eventually you get tired. Not angry, just tired. I looked at my mother standing there in her expensive coat beside the son she protected by sacrificing the daughter she underestimated. And honestly, I didn't hate either of them anymore. That was the strange part. I just finally understood them clearly. I cannot afford your kind of love, I said softly. Nobody moved after that. Not Julian. Not my mother. Not even Marcus Thorne. Because sometimes the cruelest thing you can say to someone isn't an insult. It's the moment you stop pretending their behavior is normal. I left the boardroom before anybody tried saying another word that sounded like family. Nobody stopped me. Honestly, that part felt important. For years, every conversation with my mother or Julian somehow turned into negotiations about emotional debt. Stay longer, help more, be understanding, don't embarrass the family, don't make things difficult. That boardroom was the first time in my life nobody expected me to carry the emotional weight for everybody else. The elevator doors closed quietly while Marcus Thorne's legal team immediately started discussing litigation timelines behind me. I could still hear muffled voices through the walls. Words like exposure, liability, criminal referral. Julian's future had officially become billable hours. I stood alone inside the elevator watching the floor numbers tick downward while fluorescent lights reflected softly against the brass buttons beside me. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked strange somehow. Not stronger, just lighter. By the time I stepped side the tower, downtown traffic had settled into late afternoon rhythm. Snow from earlier that morning had melted into wet streaks along the sidewalks, and the November sun hung low enough to turn half the city gold. I loosened the collar of my uniform slightly and started walking. No destination, really, just movement. That's another thing deployment teaches you. Sometimes your body keeps moving long after your brain finishes processing something painful. My phone buzzed twice before I even reached the corner intersection. Mom, then Julian. I silenced both without checking the messages, not dramatically either. No angry button pressing, no shaking hands, just done. A food truck parked outside the courthouse sold hot dogs and Polish sausages beside a row of steaming exhaust vents. Two construction workers argued about football while sharing fries from the same paper tray. Somebody farther down the block played old Johnny Cash songs through a portable speaker that crackled every few seconds. Normal life kept happening. That comforted me more than I expected, because family betrayal always feels huge when you're trapped inside it. Like the entire world should stop and acknowledge what happened to you. Then you step outside and realize some guy named Rick still needs mustard packets before his lunch break ends. I walked another 6 blocks before finally reaching Mercer Industrial District again. The neighborhood looked different during golden hour, less hostile. The old brick buildings caught warm sunlight across their upper windows, while long shadows stretched over cracked pavement and rusted loading docks. Delivery trucks moved slowly through intersections carrying pallet shipments toward the rail yard. Practical places. Working places. Nobody here cared about appearances. That's probably why I liked the district so much. I crossed Halpern Street and stopped near the chain-link fencing surrounding Lot 402. The giant red West Haven development banner still hung crooked across the brick wall where contractors bolted it days earlier. Only now the site looked abandoned. No workers. No trucks. No equipment. Just silence. Funny how quickly confidence disappears once lawyers enter the room. I stood there for a while with my hands in my coat pockets, watching sunlight slide across my grandfather's old warehouse windows. The building itself never changed. People did. When I was younger, I honestly believed family loyalty worked like military loyalty. Shared blood meant shared protection, shared sacrifice, shared responsibility. But that's not true for everybody. Some families love you. Some families evaluate you. And if you spend enough years confusing those two things, eventually you wake up emotionally exhausted without understanding why. A freight train groaned somewhere deeper in the district while cold wind pushed loose paper across the sidewalk near my boots. Above me, one of the old drain pipes rattled softly against the brick wall, exactly the same way it did the morning I came home. Only now I understood why that moment hurt so much. It wasn't really about the warehouse. Not completely. It was the realization that I kept trying to earn softness from people who benefited more from my silence. That changes a person. Or maybe it finally reveals them. I slowly walked farther down the block past the surrounding buildings Vanguard Holdings owned under quiet corporate paperwork. The laundromat, the gravel lot, the alley corridor, the storage units near the freight entrance. None of them looked impressive. That made me smile a little. Real stability rarely looks dramatic. The sunset reflected off warehouse windows in long strips of orange light, while distant traffic hummed beyond the rail yard. Somewhere nearby, somebody was welding metal because bright blue sparks flashed briefly behind an open service bay. Life moving forward again. Good. My grandfather used to tell me something whenever business got difficult. People think ownership means possession, he'd say. It doesn't. Ownership means responsibility. I didn't understand that at 26. I did now. Owning those properties wasn't about wealth. Honestly, compared to real commercial developers, Vanguard Holdings was still relatively modest. What mattered was the perimeter. The ability to decide who enters your life, what they're allowed to damage, and where the boundaries finally stop. That applies to land. It also applies to people. I stopped walking near the end of the block and looked back, one last time toward the warehouse sitting quietly in the center of everything I spent 8 years building. No anger, no victory speech, no dramatic revenge satisfaction, just relief. Deep, exhausting relief. Because for the first time in a very long while, I no longer needed my mother or brother to become different people before allowing myself peace. The sun dipped lower behind the freight district's skyline as cold evening air settled over Mercer Industrial Park. I adjusted my coat against the wind and kept walking toward the far end of the block while shadows stretched longer across the pavement behind me. Human dignity is a strange thing. People spend years begging for it from employers, relationships, parents, entire families. But dignity is not something other people grant you once they finally decide you're worthy. It's a perimeter. And sometimes survival means learning how to defend it yourself. So I kept walking north through the fading light while the city settled into evening around me, straight toward the only direction that ever really mattered. I ate cold diner meatloaf out of a plastic takeout container at 11:43 that night while sitting alone at my kitchen table in sweatpants and army socks that didn't match. That's probably the least cinematic ending possible after destroying your brother's fraudulent real estate deal in front of a room full of attorneys. Honestly, life usually looks like that after big emotional moments. Not dramatic music, microwaved gravy. My apartment was quiet except for the radiator knocking against the wall every few minutes like it personally disagreed with winter. Snow kept falling outside Riverside District, turning the freight yard lights blurry through my kitchen window. My phone had finally stopped buzzing around 10 o'clock. 23 missed calls, 4 voicemails, 2 text messages from my mother long enough to qualify as short novels. I hadn't listened to any of them yet. Not because I was angry, because for the first time in years, I realized I didn't owe immediate emotional access to people just because we shared DNA. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud. It doesn't feel obvious when you spend your entire life being the reliable one. Every family has one, the stable kid, the calm one, the person everybody quietly expects to absorb stress without complaining. You become the emergency contact, the backup plan, the human shock absorber for everybody else's bad decisions. And after a while, people stop seeing your reliability as generosity. They start seeing it as your job. That realization hit me harder than the warehouse situation itself. I set the plastic fork down and leaned back in my chair, while traffic hissed softly through wet streets outside. The truth is, Julian and my mother didn't suddenly become manipulative people 3 weeks ago when they forged paperwork. They just finally ran out of smaller ways to use me. That's what a lot of people misunderstand about toxic family dynamics. They imagine evil relatives acting like movie villains 24 hours a day. Real life usually looks much softer than that. People ask for small favors, temporary loans, emotional patience, second chances. Then one day you wake up emotionally exhausted and realize nobody inside the family system ever expected reciprocity from you. Only availability. I thought about all the little warning signs I ignored over the years because confronting them felt uncomfortable. Julian joking constantly about my warehouse being useless. My mother asking strange questions about legal paperwork. The way both of them always spoke about my military career, like it was practical but intellectually simple. Like I was hardworking enough to help people, but not smart enough to protect myself from them. That part almost made me laugh now. Because quiet people notice everything. We just don't always react immediately. I stood up and carried the empty takeout container toward the sink, while the apartment lights reflected softly against the dark kitchen windows. Somewhere downstairs, somebody was loudly vacuuming at midnight like a complete psychopath. Apartment living builds character. I rinsed the fork slowly and kept thinking about something my grandfather used to say whenever customers caused problems at the warehouse. People show you their character during transactions, he'd tell me. Money just speeds the truth up. I finally understood what he meant. Julian didn't steal from me because he was desperate to survive. He stole from me because he believed my stability existed for his convenience. And my mother helped because protecting him emotionally mattered more to her than protecting me fairly. Painful truth. Useful truth. A lot of people watching this probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe not through property fraud or forged legal documents. Maybe your version looks smaller. Maybe you're the sibling everybody borrows money from but never helps. Maybe you're the daughter expected to stay calm while everyone else explodes emotionally. Maybe you're the family member constantly told to be understanding while nobody extends that same grace back to you. Pay attention to patterns. That advice alone would save people years of suffering. Patterns matter more than emotional speeches. Anybody can cry after consequences arrive. Anybody can suddenly talk about loyalty once accountability shows up carrying paperwork. But consistent behavior tells the real story long before disaster happens. I walked back toward the kitchen table and opened my laptop again, mostly out of habit. Property reports, tax schedules, utility contracts. Order calms me down. That's another lesson I wish more people understood. Financial literacy is emotional protection. Knowing how contracts work, understanding ownership structures, keeping copies of important records. Those things are not cold or paranoid. They're survival skills, especially when family money gets involved. Never hand people blind trust just because you share relatives. That sentence sounds harsh until life proves it necessary. I finally checked one of my mother's voicemails around midnight. She sounded exhausted. Not manipulative this time, just tired. "Clara," she said quietly, "I don't know how things got this far." I paused the message there, because honestly, I did. Things get this far one tolerated boundary violation at a time, one excuse at a time, one uncomfortable conversation avoided because keeping peace feels easier than telling truth. That's how people slowly become invisible inside their own families. They spend years shrinking themselves into usefulness because they think love and self-sacrifice are the same thing. They aren't. Real love does not require your destruction to function. I closed the voicemail without listening farther and stared out the kitchen window again, while snow drifted across Riverside District under orange streetlights. And sitting there alone in that tiny apartment with mismatched socks and reheated diner food, I realized something that felt strangely peaceful. I was no longer responsible for saving people determined to misuse me. That responsibility had finally ended. Not because I stopped loving my family completely, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop volunteering as their emergency exit. I started sleeping better about 2 weeks after everything happened. Not perfectly, but better. No more waking up at 3:17 in the morning, mentally replaying old conversations, and suddenly realizing what people actually meant. No more checking my phone every 20 minutes, waiting for emotional emergencies that somehow always became my responsibility. Silence stopped feeling dangerous. That surprised me. For most of my adult life, I thought boundaries were something selfish people used to avoid helping others. That's how a lot of us get raised, especially inside families where one person constantly cleans up emotional messes for everybody else. You're told being good means being endlessly available. Answer the call, lend the money, stay patient, be understanding, forgive quickly, don't make things harder. And after enough years, you stop noticing how one-sided that arrangement becomes. I realized that the week after the boardroom meeting, while standing in line at a grocery store, buying coffee filters and frozen burritos like a completely normal person, my phone buzzed with another message from my mother. Just one sentence. Families shouldn't go to war with each other. I stood there holding generic brand tortillas under fluorescent supermarket lighting and honestly almost laughed. Because families also probably shouldn't forge legal documents and sell deployed relatives' property for Porsche payments. Funny how that part always disappears from the conversation. That's something people need to understand about guilt manipulation. It usually arrives dressed as morality, after everything we've done for you. You're really doing this to your own family? A good daughter wouldn't act this way. Notice how those statements never discuss the original betrayal itself, only your reaction to it. That's intentional. Manipulative people often care less about the harm they caused than the discomfort created when you finally stop tolerating it. I paid for my groceries, walked outside into freezing air, and watched a teenager nearly back his Honda Civic into a shopping cart while texting somebody named Ashley. Real life continuing again. Good. Healing actually starts there, not in dramatic speeches or revenge fantasies. It starts when your nervous system slowly realizes every conversation no longer has to feel like emotional hostage negotiation. A few days later, I walked through Mercer Industrial District again wearing jeans, work boots, and an old black hoodie instead of my army uniform. No lawyers this time, no legal documents, no family confrontations waiting around corners. Just ordinary afternoon light hitting old brick buildings. The giant red West Haven banner was finally gone from the warehouse. Somebody removed it after the litigation hold froze redevelopment activity. Fresh snow covered parts of the loading dock while freight trucks rolled slowly through nearby intersections carrying shipments toward the rail yard. The district looked peaceful again. I liked that. One of the mechanics from the tire shop across the alley waved at me while smoking outside his service bay. "You own the old Mercer building, right?" he asked. "Yeah. Heard some developers got themselves into a mess over there." "That happens," he laughed. "Rich people always think paperwork can beat gravity." That might have been the smartest thing anybody said during this entire situation. Because boundaries work exactly like gravity. People can ignore them for a while. Reality still wins eventually. I kept walking north through the district with my hands in my hoodie pockets, while cold wind pushed loose snow along the sidewalks. The warehouses, parking lots, and alley corridors surrounding Lot 402 looked ordinary to everybody else. But now I understood something important. Ownership changes the way you move through the world, not ownership in the billionaire fantasy sense. Most people watching this are probably not secretly building commercial real estate empires between military deployments. I'm talking about ownership of your own life, your finances, your time, your emotional peace, your ability to say no without apologizing for existing. That kind of ownership changes everything. Because once you stop depending on manipulative people for validation, they lose most of their power over you. That realization made me rethink a lot of things from my past. Every time I financially rescued Julian after one of his temporary setbacks. Every holiday where I swallowed disrespect to keep dinner peaceful. Every moment I accepted being underestimated because correcting people sounded exhausting. Calm people become dangerous eventually, not because they secretly want revenge. because one day they simply stopped volunteering for mistreatment. That's a very different thing. I think a lot of viewers need to hear this part clearly. Revenge alone does not heal you. Winning the legal battle didn't magically erase disappointment or loneliness or years of emotional imbalance inside my family. There was no magical movie ending where suddenly I felt complete. What changed me was realizing I no longer needed my mother or brother to become healthier people before allowing myself peace. That's freedom. And freedom is much quieter than people expect. I stopped near the end of the industrial block and watched workers unloading freight pallets beneath fading afternoon sunlight. Forklifts beeped in reverse. Somebody yelled for a wrench inside an open repair garage. A radio played old country music badly through blown speakers. Nobody here cared about appearances. Work either got done or it didn't. Simple. I respected that. Before heading home, I stood outside the warehouse one last time and looked at the surrounding properties stretching across the district. Then I thought about something I wish somebody taught me years earlier. Watch how people react when you finally tell them no. That moment reveals almost everything. Healthy people may feel disappointed, but they adjust. Manipulative people treat boundaries like betrayal because your limits interfere with their access. That distinction alone can save you years of emotional damage. I pulled my hood tighter against the wind and started walking again while evening settled slowly over Mercer Industrial District. And for once, I wasn't walking away from conflict. I was walking toward peace. I finally owned myself. I saw my mother once more about 4 months after the boardroom meeting, not at a holiday dinner, not in court, at a pharmacy, which honestly feels appropriate for adulthood. Most family reunions after 30 happen beside prescription counters and discounted hand lotion displays. I was grabbing allergy medicine after work when I noticed her near the greeting cards aisle, holding a basket with cough drops and bottled water. She looked older than I remembered. Not dramatically older. Just tired in a quieter way. For a second, neither of us spoke. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while somebody's toddler screamed near the checkout lanes because apparently modern parenting now includes negotiating with terrorists in Crocs. Then my mother smiled carefully. "Hi, Clara." "Hi, Mom." That was it at first. No dramatic music. No emotional collapse. Just two women standing beside seasonal candy displays trying to figure out what version of normal still existed between them. She asked how work was going. I asked whether she'd been feeling okay because her voice sounded rough. Small conversation. Careful conversation. And honestly, that moment taught me something important. Closure rarely arrives the way people imagine it. There was no giant apology waiting for me. No scene where my mother suddenly admitted every painful thing clearly and perfectly. Human beings almost never do that because fully acknowledging the damage they caused would force them to confront themselves honestly. Most people protect their self-image harder than their relationships. That's reality. My mother never became a villain in her own mind. Julian probably didn't either. In their version of events, circumstances got complicated. Mistakes were made. Things escalated unnecessarily. People rewrite stories psychologically so they can survive living inside themselves. Understanding that changed me, because for years I thought healing depended on other people finally admitting the truth. It doesn't. Healing starts when you stop requiring accountability from emotionally unavailable people before allowing yourself peace. That lesson cost me a warehouse, a family structure, and probably several years of emotional exhaustion. Expensive education. Useful education. Mom adjusted the scarf around her neck awkwardly while pharmacy employees restocked shelves nearby. "I miss talking to you," she said softly. That one hurt a little. Not enough to break me anymore. Just enough to remind me that grief and boundaries can exist together at the same time. A lot of viewers need to hear that. Protecting yourself does not automatically mean you stop loving people completely. Sometimes it simply means you stop allowing access to the parts of you they consistently damage. That distinction matters. "I'm doing okay," I told her honestly. And for the first time in years, I actually meant it. We stood there another minute, talking politely about weather and work schedules before she finally nodded toward the checkout lanes. "Well," she said quietly, "I should probably get going." "Yeah." Then she hesitated. "I am glad you came home safe from deployment." Simple sentence. Late sentence. But real. I nodded once. And that was enough. No grand reconciliation. No dramatic forgiveness scene. Just two people finally speaking without pretending the past never happened. After she left, I stayed inside the pharmacy for another few minutes, staring at cold medicine like it personally owed me answers. Because that's the strange thing nobody explains about surviving betrayal. Eventually, the anger leaves. Then underneath it, you finally find the sadness that was there the entire time. Not sadness over losing money or property. Sadness over realizing you kept hoping certain people would eventually love you in healthier ways than they were capable of. That kind of grief takes longer to untangle. But once you do, something inside you becomes calmer. Stronger, too. A few weeks later, I walked through Mercer Industrial District again near sunset, while freight trains rolled slowly across the western rail lines. Winter was ending. Dirty snow melted along the curbs while workers repaired potholes near Halpern Street. The neighborhood kept changing, so did I. The redevelopment signs around Lot 402 were gone permanently now. West Haven backed out after the fraud investigations exploded into civil litigation and financial audits. Last I heard, Marcus Thorne settled privately after Julian's attorneys started drowning in paperwork and debt exposure. Funny ending for a man who loved appearances so much. Paperwork finally beat him. I stopped outside the warehouse for a moment while evening sunlight reflected across the upper brick windows. Workers nearby loaded pallets into a delivery truck, while somebody played classic rock from somewhere outside a machine shop radio. Ordinary life again. Good. My grandfather used to believe strong people were the loudest people in the room. The army cured me of that idea fast. Real strength is usually quiet. It's the ability to stay emotionally steady when chaos tries recruiting you back into dysfunction. It's learning how to say no without explaining yourself for 3 straight hours afterward. It's leaving rooms where your value only exists when you are useful. Most importantly, it's understanding that dignity is not negotiable. Not for money, not for guilt, not even for family, especially not for family. I think a lot of people spend years shrinking themselves just to remain acceptable inside toxic relationships. They apologize for healthy boundaries. They tolerate disrespect because conflict feels scary. They keep trying to prove their worth to people already benefiting from their low self-worth. Please stop doing that to yourselves. Seriously. Watch how people behave when you finally protect your peace. That reaction tells you everything. The sun dipped lower behind the industrial skyline, while cold wind carried the smell of diesel fuel and wet concrete through the district. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking north again past the surrounding buildings. Vanguard Holdings still quietly owned. No audience. No revenge fantasy. No bitterness left to carry. Just direction. And honestly, after everything that happened, that turned out to be enough. If this story reminded you of your own experiences with toxic family dynamics, manipulation, betrayal, or learning self-respect the hard way, I hope you remember this. Protecting your dignity does not make you cruel. Sometimes it simply means you finally decided your peace deserves protection too. And if you want more grounded stories about family, resilience, emotional survival, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel. There are a lot more people out there still learning how to walk north after surviving the wrong kind of love.